All right. On our last episode, Jeremiah had cancer. Jeremiah still got cancer, but in this episode we're talking about religion. So we're not talking about that. Again, if that's something you guys want to talk about or wondering about, you know, I'll do an episode on that or something if you want. But um I brought up the fact that I was or am a Christian, and I also brought up that that was, because I grew up where I grew up at and the circumstances that happened in my household and stuff like that. Of course, people can choose their religion later on in life if they want to convert to something else or whatever. It really is a personal preference sort of thing. And I'll explain why that's uh, what its importance is and why that's not important when it comes, or it's only partially important when it comes to God. I mean, I don't really want to, it's not that God exists outside of the realm of religion, but as far as that's concerned, I wouldn't put it in that category. You know what I mean? A person can be religious and have a religious belief that isn't necessarily, you know, in line with what God would necessarily think or want, and which is certainly the case uh, sometimes. And you can find that that's been a problem for a long time, and that's why people judge religion so much, is because, some religions just they got some kooky things that they do. But that's kind of the point that we're going to get to here. I'm going to share a verse with you from the Bible, from my religion, that kind of explains what I'm trying to say. And the verse subsequently comes from Jeremiah. You'll find a lot that I bring up a lot of his passages and stuff. Uh, I'm not trying to pretend I'm the guy or anything like that. We'll also be talking about reincarnation in this, just to throw a little wrench in the works there. We're going to be talking about that in just a second, but you know, I, I'm certainly not. Don't think anything like that, like I'm associated with such a great man at all. And in fact, we'll talk about that and him here in a moment, but I'll just share this verse with you to get across what I was trying to say. The verse is Jeremiah chapter 23, and it's all the verses from the beginning through, but what it talks about, I'll give you a little summary of it. Uh, Most people take a lot of these things within the context of the time period and what was happening, like, because a lot of these prophecies were within the time frame of when the person lived. And so there were things happening in society at the time in this area that is a reflection of what Jeremiah is saying. So when he's talking about this stuff, he's talking about it in the context of like the people of that time being moved out of the region that they lived in, and then, prophesying that they would come back to that region and that God would bring them back into that region. And that's what this whole flock being spread out and then being regathered is all talking about. It's all in relation to. The thing is that you will find that time is cyclical and events tend to repeat themselves. And so this is a thing that holds true now. It holds true today, but it also holds true in other things. And there is a belief and a saying amongst Hermeticists that goes as above, so below. And it's in reference to the ability to compare things to one another that work on like a cosmic scale down to a microscopic scale. And things have relations and correlations with each other, not not just talking about outer space and atoms, but within society, within our mental state, within the consciousness of people, within, you know, sciences, the stock market, music, like the list could go on. But there's a structure to it, and that structure is a thing that you can witness. There's a pattern to it. And that's part of what I'm trying to share with you is that I feel as though I might understand the pattern better than some people, and I'm trying to share what I do know and just get an opinion from other people and see if you guys agree that it is a pattern, and we can go from there, and I'll learn about it together if that's the case. So, there's a couple different versions of this verse, but I'm just going to give you this one. Woe to the shepherds who destroy and scatter the sheep of my pasture, says Yahweh. Therefore, Yahweh, the God of Israel, says against the shepherds who feed my people, you have scattered my flock, driven them away, and have not visited them. Behold, I will visit on you the evil of your doings, says Yahweh. I will gather the remnant of my flock out of all countries where I have driven them, and will bring them again to their folds, and they will be fruitful and multiply. I will set up shepherds over them who will feed them. They will no longer be afraid or dismayed, neither will any be lacking, says Yahweh. The certainty with which Jeremiah speaks, man, that's something that I've always admired because I always feel so uncertain. But I have faith that God will give me the words. And if they are indeed the words that you need to hear, that He'll make sure that you guys hear them. But back to what I was saying, the whole as above, so below thing applies here. Uh, when we're talking about shepherds, all right, that's an analogy, obviously, that he's given to like a caretaker over a flock of sheep. And the sheep in this analogy being the people. Now, that's got a lot of negative connotations nowadays that, people see that as like a mind control sort of thing. When you're sheep, it's like they call them sheeple and stuff like that. You see, that's the thing. That's what this verse is about. Woe to the shepherd. Like, imagine just for a second that you're God. I mean, don't get a big head, don't start thinking that's you, but it's certainly necessary to try to see from his perspective sometimes and try to look at his perspective in this instance. How upset would you be if they were misled? Say there's some stipulation that makes it so that, God can only visit his creation every so often, maybe once every billion or trillion years or zillion years, whatever, I don't know. And so he leaves people in charge while he's gone. Then he comes back and his sheep are like, "Where's my sheep?" And they're like, "Dude, I don't know." Like you'd be pretty pissed, I'm sure, especially if you love them. They're like these helpless creatures. They don't know what's going on. They need to be guided, you know. And so that's kind of where this comes into play. And there's nothing more heinous, in my opinion, in my eyes, than someone being afraid to trust and afraid to have faith because of people that make them afraid. You know what I mean? Like when someone wrongs you, it leaves you sore and it makes you feel like you shouldn't trust them. But if we learn from our mistakes and we see that a person is someone that can do that, that can learn from their mistakes, then we find that they become trustworthy. They earn our trust and our loyalty. And that's a possibility. That's something you can do if you're the type that can learn from mistakes. And we all make mistakes, you know. But there's different types of shepherds, you know. It goes on in that verse. I don't know, different versions of it. You can find places in some of the other Bibles it'll talk about woe to the pastor and woe to the teacher, things like that, uh, that are similar. They are more literal and less of an analogy, but pretty much talking about anybody that would stray someone from God. And the whole point to everything is to try to gather everybody, gather the flock towards God. And just like there are pastors and teachers that were mentioned in there, there are other shepherds, celestial shepherds. You can think of people like Jesus and the Buddha and uh, Muhammad, peace be upon him, that, well, peace be upon all of them, of course, but there's, those people are shepherds, meant to shepherd us towards God. And it's like a hierarchy thing where people are responsible for those that are below them, just like a boss or a manager is put in charge of someone. When that someone does something wrong, it's the boss or manager's responsibility to, take responsibility for that. And so that's the same thing that that passage is talking about, is that the shepherds are responsible for the flock. And if they don't do their job, then it warns that they'll be punished by God for that. And so you shouldn't do that. And so when it comes to different religions, it doesn't matter what religion a person practices. It's their business whether or not their shepherd is leading them astray. And their shepherd will be responsible for that. And they will be responsible for anyone else that they lead astray. And they are responsible for themselves as well. In the end, you know, we're all responsible for ourselves, but uh, obviously we can't sit there and say, oh, but this person led me astray. We need to do our own due diligence, but at the same time, them leading you astray, like they would, it warns, get repercussions from that. So, so there's that. That's the explanation for the whole religion thing and why it is that I'm into the religion I'm into. That's just Jesus is my shepherd, and that's it. And I'm not trying to force that upon anybody else. And we can have debates about whether or not you think it's real or whatever. That's fine. You want to talk about that sometime, we can do that. But I don't knock anybody at all for their beliefs except for atheists. And I will talk to atheists about their stuff if they want to. They um, are wrong, though. Like, I mean, blatant atheists, like the ones like no, absolute zero, there's no God whatsoever sort of thing. Not ones that are like, oh, there's a possibility of something like an agnostic or something, I think they call them. But anyways, um, on to the next bit here about the whole reincarnation and prophets thing and stuff like that. Reincarnation is absolutely a thing, and it was a thing in Christianity way back in the day, but Christianity's gone through some changes over the centuries. And if you do your research, you can find that out. But I mean, I can discuss it some other time, but I guess the point isn't really about Christian reincarnation in this video, at least. But I am touching shortly on it just to say that that's a really super bad thing that's going around. This whole concept of you only live once that people keep pushing. The reason for that is that misinformation about reincarnation and about the fact that we're reborn. It instills like this urgency in us to do certain things and to participate in certain reckless behaviors because we feel like we only have so much time. Now, we do only have so much time. Obviously, that's why I'm here doing these videos. I only have so much time in this life. But, we have other lives. We have lived other lives. And the reason I say that with such certainty is because of the research and because of my theory. It's part of the process. Like, that's part of the theory of everything. Obviously, it's going to include things that have to do with what happens to us after we die. And there's a process, a mechanism, a function, a system by which it all works. And if you understand it, it's like it's got a logic to it. You know, it's pretty, when you see how it works, it becomes obvious that's why. And reincarnation is a thing that has to be present in order for it to work. I mean, think about it. You know, the whole Christian concept of heaven and hell and stuff, that's a thing. Heavens and hells, they exist. I'll explain that as well in another video, maybe. I might do that in the next one. We'll do religion part two because I want to try to keep these short. And right now we're just talking about what's up with religion and prophets. So um, we'll talk about the heaven and hell thing later on. But uh, so how does that work in with reincarnation? Well, that's like I said, I'll have to get into more detail about that to get you to really explain it. But they work in unison with each other. Reincarnation and the whole concept of heaven and hell and stuff. Those things are things that we create. They're created by the inhabitants. Whether or not something is a heaven or a hell has all to do with the people that are standing next to you. And that's something that we need to address here in the world right now, is whether or not we wish this to be a heaven or a hell. You know, that is entirely up to the inhabitants. But again, we'll go on to that more later on. But so that led me to wonder about previous lives and what previous lives I might have lived. I wondered about Jeremiah Johnson. I was kind of named after him a little bit, and the name was inspired by it because my parents were watching the show at the time. But that kind of deterred me from learning much about the prophet when I was a young man, you know, because his nickname was the Weeping Prophet, and I kind of thought that was like sissy or something. So I just didn't take much interest in the prophet and instead did more the wilderness guy. You know, I liked his story, and the movie was awesome with Robert Redford. Uh, so, you know, I did research into that, just kind of exploring ideas, looked up, you know, stuff that might coincide between individuals named Jeremiah, like myself, and, uh, you know, there's no guarantee a person's going to have the same name when they're reborn. You know, you could have been named something else, especially if you were like a woman or something like that. That's possible. But there's power in names. And what I found out was that, I don't know, sometime like the way that time works and stuff, there's certain mantles that are placed upon people. And when it comes to higher beings, higher dimensional beings like gods and angels and things like that, they see time differently than we do. And so they're able to place things in our path. They're able to know things before we know them, like our names and what they'll be and what will become and things like that. It doesn't remove our free will at all. It's like when a human looks down on an ant walking across the sidewalk, you know, you get to see what he has in store for him far before the ant gets to see, because for the ant, it's a far distance away before he even gets there. and he's got to pass through time to get there. But you could reach down and change his path, put a stick in front of the ant and make him have to walk around it way before that ant ever even knows that stick was put there and who put it there. You know, to that ant, that stick was put there 200 years ago by some giant god, you know. Same sort of concept. Things are placed in our paths, and then we just have our free will to choose that path. We have to choose our own destiny. And that's one of the stories that's told countless times about prophets in the Bible. You know, the other nickname Jeremiah has is the reluctant prophet. And if you ask me, do I think I am the prophet Jeremiah? If you blatantly asked me that, I would blatantly tell you no, or that I don't know, because I don't know. I have zero clue of who I was in any previous life. I don't have any visions of that. I would, I'm very curious to get a past life regression sort of thing. I think that that's interesting. I've watched videos on those things and that sounds cool, but I would never ever pretend to be something like that. I take very much a lot of inspiration from uh, biblical stuff and particularly his works because he has the same name as me, but not in any means am I delusional or think that I am that person. Um, And I certainly like even if I did say I got a past life regression tomorrow and found out, I would probably keep that information to myself. I feel like that's a personal thing. Um, which I guess brings me to mention the difference between spirituality and religion. A spirituality is your personal relationship with God and your personal spiritual journey. It's like the solo mission that you have. And your religion is your sharing of that with your group. You know, you guys get together under the context of the world that you live in and share uh, with one another how you know your spiritual experiences and stuff like that and come together to learn about God from information that you've all gathered through that intercourse. Uh so there's a big difference there. And when it comes to that, I don't feel like that information, even if that were the case, I don't think that it would help. It certainly wouldn't gain me any credibility. It would probably make people think that I was freaking crazy because, you know, those are things, like I said, those are personal to a person. That's like only something that you could know, or that's only valuable information for you to know. You go and tell somebody else that, anyone that's going to believe that and then surround themselves or, you know, surround you with their presence because they know that information, like, what type of person does that? You know, that's like a you're only gonna end up with freaking cult members or something like that. Like people with those mindsets, people that have those tendencies and stuff, and you don't want to surround yourself with those people. So why would you tell anybody that unless you wanted them, unless you wanted like credibility in the eyes of those type of people? And those aren't the type of people you want to have credibility with. You want it to have it with normal individuals, like 9 to 5 Joe Schmoes that just live and have a level head and are just, you know, normal men and women and etc. of the world. And so And so no, I certainly don't think that stuff, and I probably wouldn't even say that sort of thing if I were told that that were the case about myself. Uh, that being said, let's go on to briefly mention about how to identify a false prophet. That would pretty much be anybody that says that they are one. Plain and simple, like if they say they are one, they're lying. Uh, if you notice, prophets are usually not referred to as such in their time period. It's the sort of thing that happens either posthumously or, if it happens in their lifetime, it's after the event. You know, a, a person's just crazy up until then. They only become a prophet after the thing happens. And so I certainly wouldn't want to be one because if anything that I say, comes true, that the whole point is to try to stop the thing. That's why prophets come and warn people. They don't want to be a prophet because if what they say comes true, that means they weren't successful in what they were trying to do. You know what I mean? And so that's one of the other things that the research points to, um, that there is a connection between our behavior as human beings and the physical state of the planet, and natural disasters and global warming and things like that. Those are all connected with the mental consciousness and the state of humanity. We're like the brain of the planet. And if we go crazy, then, well, so does the environment and the animals and just the planet in general. I know it's a lot to handle, and you probably think I'm lying out my ass, but like I says, I don't have much time to talk, so I just gotta talk. Whether it's sloppy or pretty or whatever it is, I gotta say something. And I can't be too picky about it. We gotta make a change, you know. We gotta stop fighting with each other about stuff. And we need to work together from the bottom up because it's not gonna work from top down. Nobody up there is gonna help us. And I just want us all to come together and fix things. And I feel like if we realize certain things, one of those things being about God, that it will help bring us together and we can fight this thing. In the Bible, there's a thing Jeremiah does where he buys some land as like a symbol of faith and hope in the future. That's where this verse comes from that's on my necklace here. Um, I'll pull it off and read it to you. It's Jeremiah 29:11. It's one of the most well known of the verses. And it goes, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope in a future." So in the Bible, Jeremiah buys some land to show the people that um, he doesn't believe that they're going to be destroyed and that he has hope that they'll be able to change their ways and they'll do what God asks. And purchases that land as like a place for the people to go and to live and to set up because he feels like there will be people left to live and to start fresh and anew. And that's what I want to do. You know, I have hope for the future. I have faith. One of the things that really interested me, uh, and I'll close with this. I was talking about atheists just a minute ago and how they're wrong, and a popular atheist argument is that, you know, where is God? Why doesn't God stop all this bad stuff from happening? And why does God let bad things happen? That was one of the most profound things that I came to understand in this is the reason why God doesn't do anything. You know, they use the book of Job as an example of that. And in the book of Job, I talked about that. You can go back and watch the previous video. I'm not going to go into it because I already did a big long thing about it. Go watch it if you want to see it. But it's called Pastor James' Last Sermon, I think. That's what I named it. Um, but the thing is that it's up to us. Like I said, it's the inhabitants that make a place a heaven or a hell. And God doesn't do anything because even if we don't have faith in God, God has faith in us. And that was just so humbling to me that God has faith in me. He has faith in all of us. He has faith that we can turn this around, that we can do for ourselves, that we don't need to look to the government or look to rich people or politicians or anybody else to fix it, that we can fix it ourselves, just in our own neighborhoods. Do as much as you can, any little thing, going out and helping your neighbor rake up some leaves, stopping someone from stealing a package, talking to them about stealing and why it was they felt they needed to do that, helping them out if they, need money or resources or anything. We need to help each other, man, and bring each other together and stop fighting. If reincarnation, well, if reincarnation is able to be scientifically proven, what implications that has is immense, especially when it comes to stuff like our race and our religion. If we've been multiple races and religions in life, in our afterlife, or, if our afterlife, our souls experience different bodies, then we have no reason to be racist or to hate each other's religions or things like that. I just feel like so much good can be done from certain types of information. Correct me if I'm wrong. Certainly, bad can be done with certain information, and certainly misinformation. But I think this is some information we're all ready for, and not just ready, but way past due. I don't know. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. We'll talk about stuff like heaven and hell probably in the next one. I don't know. I'm certainly going to talk about my theory at some point. But, anyways, I hope you guys are liking this stuff. I'll talk to you again soon. All right, bye.